Welcome to today's masterclass. My name is Lisa Richter, and I will be your host today. On the off chance you don't know about CSIA, we are a global nonprofit trade association with over 500 member companies in 35 countries. For system integrator members, the CSIA Best Practices Manual and CSIA certification are some of the more popular member benefits, but you will also enjoy a variety of others, including professional development, learning from your peers, and access to professional services experts, including insurance, financial, and legal, who understand the SI's unique business needs. For partner members, CSIA offers an ecosystem to grow your SI programs, understand your customers' pain points, monitor industry trends, and share your thought leadership. With thousands of qualified integrators and suppliers, the CSIA Industrial Automation Exchange helps SIs, industry suppliers, and manufacturers connect and do business. For SIs and partners, it provides a platform to support your content and SEO marketing efforts, position yourself as a thought leader, and nurture prospects during their complicated buyer's journey. In case you aren't a current member, now is a great time to join. Membership provides you with many benefits, including a full lineup of virtual events and other resources for you and your entire team, from accounting to sales to operations, 365 days per year. Plus, CSIA dues are prorated, which means that if you join now, you will get the rest of 2022 and all of 2023 included in your dues. If you're currently a member, thank you. And remember, membership renewals will start this month, so please watch your inbox for your renewal notice so that you can continue to enjoy your membership benefits uninterrupted. One last housekeeping note before I turn it over. I want to remind you that if you have not set up your new account in CSIA's new database, please do so today. This is important because you will need new login credentials to access dues and update contact information and to access your member benefits. If you have any questions during today's webinar, we welcome that. Please put them in the Q&A so that we can keep track of everything, and chat is fine. Go ahead and chat amongst yourselves. That really helps me keep organized if you put your questions in the Q&A feature. At this time, I would like to turn it over to today's speaker, Scott Phillips. Take it away.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. Let me share my screen here. Okay, can you see my screen okay? So I just want to thank Lisa. My name's Scott Phillips. I want to thank Lisa and CSIA for this opportunity to share some thoughts today about the topic of Industry 4.0 and what I have learned over my career working with manufacturers and a little bit with system integrators. So a little bit about me. I spent most of my career at Whirlpool Corporation in US operations and a little bit overseas. I've also spent about 5 years consulting as part of a couple different programs sponsored by the US Department of Commerce. I visited a lot of small, medium manufacturers who had been impacted by import competition and tried to help them qualify for assistance. I've also been doing Industry 4.0 road mapping for manufacturers for about the last 4 years. And when I'm not doing all that, I also help run an Industry 4.0 technology accelerator funded by the state of Michigan. There, what we try to do is we attract Industry 4.0 technologies to Michigan to help Michigan manufacturers. And I am based in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Today, what I'd like to do is talk about some topics that are all related to what I would say is kind of like the elephant in the room, which is Industry 4.0. And, you know, from my experience, Industry 4.0 can be hard to describe by subject matter experts and really hard to understand by manufacturing end users or system integrators. And what I have found is what's often missing is a trusted advisor that people can trust to help them along. So what I'm going to do today is touch on 4 key questions that I've learned to try to address 4 common mistakes that go with them. The way I like to have 6 conversations when I'm working with manufacturers, talk a little bit about data-driven cultures, and then kind of finish up with what I see as the opportunity for control system integrators in this space. So just to start off with the 4 key questions, and I traveled to Germany about 7 years ago to learn about Industry 4.0. When I came back, started working with manufacturers in the US, it seemed to me they all had these 4 questions. They might ask them differently, but to some degree, this is the issues. The one is, they didn't really understand what it is. What is Industry 4.0? If they got beyond that, it was hard to understand why they should care about it. The third issue was where to start. And the fourth was how to scale new solutions and technologies across their enterprise. Really, it's hard to move on to the following questions if you don't answer the first 2. And the third and the fourth question, where to start and how to scale, really have to be thought about together to avoid some common mistakes. And I'll talk more about that. So let's just start out with some definitions that I'm going to use today. I don't profess that these are the right perfect definitions, but it's a working definition for this webinar. So for anybody online that's not as familiar with this topic, the idea of the 4th Industrial Revolution came out of Germany in 2011. Going back in time, the first Industrial Revolution was in the late 1800s, and it was kind of the idea of mechanization of water, power, and steam. A century later, mass production, the assembly line, electricity. Late 20th century was computerization and automation of manufacturing processes. And the kind of the label with the 4th Industrial Revolution is cyber physical systems. So when people say the 4th Industrial Revolution or I-40, what I would say is it's the new paradigm or the period that we live in currently. And it is characterized by the convergence of information and operating technologies into new solutions which improve operating efficiency and also create new business opportunities for manufacturers. To me, it's really important to think about what the outcome is that you're trying to achieve. And what I work with companies on is the idea of becoming a data-driven culture. And that also needs to be defined. The way I define a data-driven culture is organizations that can assess situations clearly, make decisions quickly, solve problems systematically, and predict problems accurately. Those are the 4 things that are normally going on kind of day in and day out in an operation. The 4 questions that I mentioned earlier have a corollary. So these are the 4 common mistakes that companies make from my experience if they don't address those 4 key questions. So if they don't bother to understand what it is, what Industry 4.0 is, they're going to fall into complacency and at the risk of becoming the frog boiling in the water. And I'll talk more about that. If they don't understand or make the effort to understand why to care, they're really at risk of decisions overlooked. Kind of like the ostrich with their head in the sand. They see what's going on around them, but hesitate to create some momentum internally. If they get beyond that, the risk is to not understand where to start. So we've all seen companies that have maybe a cobot in the corner or a 3D printer over there, but to some degree, they're at risk of being like the pig with lipstick on. They're trying to do things, but it's very fragmented initiatives. If they get beyond all that, the 4th common mistake is decisions poorly implemented. This is the idea of not scaling just because of too many fragmented point solutions throughout an operation. And I'll talk more about each of these. And again, as Lisa said, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A. I would much rather answer your questions than necessarily get through the slides here. So complacency, or the frog boiling in the water, what I've seen in my experience, especially the last 5 years working with small, medium manufacturers, mostly in the upper Midwest, is the causes for this are really lack of education, lack of motivation, or lack of bandwidth, or all the above. Education, if an organization's not involved in associations like CSIA or others, or not attending conferences, they're highly at risk of falling behind from an education standpoint. From a motivation standpoint, I tend to run across a lot of what I would call lifestyle businesses. So small, medium manufacturers that, as long as they're able to support maybe the family or the owner and make a living, it's good enough. And then probably the biggest problem, though, by far, especially with small, medium manufacturers. And when I say small, medium, I usually mean manufacturers under 500 employees. That's the kind of the standard definition in the US. Bandwidth is by far the biggest issue, especially the smaller ones where the owner or the leadership team is working in the business instead of on the business, which is often the case when you've got supply chain disruptions and labor shortages and so forth. The second mistake, decisions overlooked, and this is really the six conversations or decisions that I've learned over 5 years of working with small, medium manufacturers. So when I'm talking about Industry 4.0, I try to stay away from jargon and hype and technical terms. To me, it's much more effective just to have a process where you can engage them in these 6 conversations. Where to become more data-driven, how to act faster, how to act smarter, which solutions to prioritize, which technologies to leverage, and which competencies to develop. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about these in a few slides. And probably what I've learned, I guess, if there was one thing to take away from this presentation, it's this idea of decisions poorly made. So it's not at all unusual for me to see consultants or others working with just the leadership team at a manufacturer. You'll often hear people say that, all of us are smarter than any of us. And I'll be with a lot of companies who will say their frontline workers are closer to the issues and the challenges. But when you look at how they have conversations or make decisions, it's tend to be too centrally controlled by the ownership or leadership team. And so there's a famous book, The Wisdom of Crowds from 2004, written by James Surowiecki. I highly recommend it to anyone. He actually proved the science behind the idea that all of us are smarter than any of us. So as you're answering those 6 decisions on the previous slides, you really need to make sure you're getting diverse perspectives, independent opinions, and decentralized knowledge from throughout the operation, especially as complex as manufacturing is. And then the last common mistake are the decisions poorly implemented. So what I have seen from organizations of all size is 3 things. One is they're overconfident in their existing organization. And that can be just because maybe they're family owned or lifestyle managed or haven't brought in talent from the outside. The second mistake I see here is over-reliance on their existing vendors. Sometimes this is called vendor lock-in. So maybe they're over-reliant on their ERP vendor to drive all their front office, or they're over-reliant on their automation, Siemens or Rockwell or somebody to drive their entire floor. Yeah. And so this can be a problem if they're stuck on kind of a vendor lock-in situation. And then the last one, and the one I'm going to talk about a little bit more today, is system architecture. A lot of manufacturers that I work with don't really have a system architecture. And what I mean by that is they don't really have an organized system of people, processes, and technologies to address the core processes day in and day out. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So what hasn't changed in manufacturing is the core processes. While there are varying degrees of complexity depending on what industry you're in or your particular business, but manufacturers all sell things, they plan things, they make stuff, they monitor activities, they inspect stuff, inventory it, ship it, and then order more stuff. And the issue with becoming data-driven is those 4 activities of assessing situations clearly, making decisions quickly, solving problems at root cause systematically, and predicting potential problems. Those are cropping up all day, every day in these core processes. And so for anybody that's ever done value stream mapping as part of a lean initiative where you're mapping both your material and your information flows, you know that the information has to flow cleanly between systems and the variation in your information has to be minimized. And so that's much easier said than done, for sure. So when we talk about where to start, what I always try to get at first is, where is the organization struggling most to be data-driven? Is it the enterprise level? Is it the shop floor level? Or is it the work cell level? And while this is a simplistic model, it does cover most industrial processing organizations and manufacturers. Most organizations are struggling more so at one of these three levels of the organization than the other two. And it's important to have a conversation about which one it is and why. And it's not that you don't want to address all three parts of your organization, you certainly do, but you really have to understand where to start first so that you get some quick wins, early momentum, and then scale across the other parts of the business. The system integrators on the phone might be familiar with this diagram. It's a bit of another way of thinking about that. This is sometimes called the automation pyramid or the Purdue model or the ISA 95 reference architecture. And depending on the system integrator, they may play at different levels of this 5-level model. They may have expertise in 2 or 3, but not the others. But the point of this is that these 4 types of decisions that need to be made all day, at some levels need to be made in seconds and milliseconds and minutes, hours, days. And so what you really have to help a manufacturer think about is, which part of their organization are they taking too long to assess situations, make decisions, and solve problems? Is it at the field level, the process level, the sensing and manipulation level? So this is just a little bit more of a detailed diagram to follow up on the prior slide. I mentioned system architecture, and again, this is not a universal view of all manufacturers, but this is from my experience, particularly over the last 5 to 6 years. So what I have seen is that a lot of organizations start out in the lower left corner of this diagram as kind of a tribal architecture. And what I mean by that is information is exchanged verbally, data is retained in individual heads, and then there are other characteristics that kind of highlight when somebody is in a tribal architecture. And that's not unusual for a new organization or where people started. Somewhere along the line, the manufacturer needed to become more competitive, needed to become more efficient. So they changed their architecture, but I would call it an accidental architecture. It wasn't intentionally designed or followed. Information may be exchanged in meetings in this case, and data still often retained on an analog basis in paper and email, whiteboards and blueprints. As organizations evolved and people tried to implement some technology or some automation, either in the front office or the shop floor, it became kind of a siloed organization. So information had to be exchanged across silos of information throughout the company. And data tended to be retained in tools like Excel or Word or Access or desktop tools. And then what I noticed was around 2000, the year 2000, mostly for financial reasons or Sarbanes-Oxley or Y2K or the Euro, a lot of manufacturers were advised to implement an ERP system or an MES system or something like that. And many are still on that journey, implementing their different modules of their ERP. So this is what I would call a monolithic architecture. The company is exchanging information now in standard reporting coming out of that system, and the data tends to be retained in an ERP, a CRM or a PLM, or all 3 of the above, but enterprise level software. When we think about Industry 4.0, what you have to begin thinking about is an open architecture. And so as IT and OT converges in Industry 4.0, there's a lot more tools available that can make information flow freely. And so it's a big change to make, for sure, culturally and with technology, but here information is exchanged when and where needed by the end user. Data in open architecture tends to be retained in a unified namespace or sometimes a data warehouse. but a way to get at data and distribute data when and where it's needed to take action and make decisions. So again, this is overly simplistic, but this is kind of an evolution that I've seen some manufacturers follow. This is the same core processes. I want to show a slide from a client I worked with about 2 or 3 years ago. A lot of clients I work with really are not able to even draw their information flows because things kind of grew organically. So they may not have an information flow map or a system map. I worked with this company for about 4 weeks, and each time they revised the picture of how information was flowing in their shop floor and front office. And the thing about this picture is that, as all you probably know on the phone, you've got kind of a disparity here of on-premise tools and cloud tools. You've got manual efforts and some point solutions. Some of them are being interfaced manually where information is being recreated, some automatically. And what's not in this picture, if you could imagine overlaying all the sticky notes and Excel spreadsheets and meetings and other things that have to supplement this information flow. And this was about I would say this is about a $40 million machine shop in the automotive industry. And the thing is, that picture is almost best in class from others I've seen, as disaggregated as it is. But at least they were able to draw a reasonable picture of it. This is the point I want to make about this, though, more than anything, is it's not so much a matter of which of those 5 stages you're at from a maturity standpoint. It's more the point of recognizing which one you're in and which one you're trying to get to. I think the real problem happens when different parts of an organization have different parts of their core processes still in an accidental architecture or in a siloed or in a monolithic. And that's where the inefficiencies and frustrations start to happen. So this is really an important conversation to have with a manufacturer about where are you now and which one are you trying to get to? And do we have a pathway and a strategy to get there? So we talked about the 6 conversations, and I'm going to go into them a little bit more, but I can't emphasize enough that if you really want to get at the answer to those 4 key questions, you really have to find a way to engage your manufacturer, your organization, and you've got to think about diverse perspectives, independent opinions, and decentralized knowledge. When I work with companies, I see patterns within a company about how people answer certain questions depending on 4 demographics: by their level in the organization, by their years of experience, by their functional role they play, and by their gender. And it's not always the case, but it's often the case that the way people answer the 6 questions tends to see patterns across those 4 demographics. So I just want to talk about these 6 conversations that I believe are necessary. And I think people on this phone call who are a solution provider of some kind, or a consultant or a system integrator, there's a big role for you to play to help a manufacturer answer these 6 questions. The first one, again, is where to become more data-driven. And it's not enough to just say we need to completely become more data-driven. We really need to think about which organizational level offers the best opportunity for performance improvement, whether that's the enterprise level, the shop floor level, and the work cell level. So what I do in my tools and practices is I make sure that we reach out to a diverse set of people and give them definitions of these 3 levels of the organization, and have them answer and provide comments about why they think they're struggling more in one place than the other. Once you answer that, the second question is how to act faster. So there's a concept called the information value loop. This comes from Deloitte. And the idea is that whether it's your personal life or your business life, all information tends to flow through 5 stages to become useful information. It has to be created, has to be communicated, it has to be aggregated, analyzed, and then acted upon. And not all organizations are equally good or poor at all 5 of these. So it's really important that, given how we answered the first question, what is the stage of information value that we're struggling with? Are we not creating enough data, or we're not getting it from point A to point B, or we're not aggregating it well enough to even analyze it, or we are aggregating it but not analyzing it, or we're doing all 4 of those things but not acting upon it quickly? And the next third conversation is really about how to act smarter. So people have heard about big data and the types of big data. Sometimes it's known as the 5 V's or 4 V's, but when I think of big data, I think about things like reliability of the data, velocity of the data, the volume of data that we're creating, and the variety of data. There are other attributes of big data, but from my experience, if you focus on these 4, you'll get kind of to the heart of the matter. And so if we're going to act smarter and make our decisions quickly and assess situations faster, we have to understand if our issue is more around the reliability of the data we're creating, or the volume, or we're creating plenty. Maybe we're creating 8 gigabytes a day, or megabytes a day, I'm sorry, or terabytes a day. But the velocity of which we're using that to make decisions is we're at 8% or 6% or 15%. So that's a velocity issue. And variety means maybe we're still only using comments and handwritten information and not really reviewing tag data or sensor data or image data or video data. So just thinking about which of those drivers could help us become smarter. These first 3 conversations really are about data-driven, helping an organization understand what it means to become more data-driven. The 4th conversation, which is important to have, is which solutions to prioritize. What I do is I present a manufacturer with maybe 20 solutions or use cases that are popular. These are things you might hear or see at conferences or webinars. And I ask them to prioritize them based on the answers to the first 3 conversations. The reason you need to do this is, depending on the size and the sophistication of an organization, they may not understand the current state of the art with Industry 4.0. They may not understand what automated inspection really is, or real-time production monitoring, or digital work instruction. So it's important that a very diverse group get exposed to what these most common applications are, and then align themselves on which ones to pursue first. The 5th conversation I like to have is around the enabling technologies. And it's really important to have this after the solution conversation, not before it. Boston Consulting in 2016 made famous this idea of 9 pillars of technology that drive Industry 4.0. And especially a small medium manufacturer is not going to be able to create core competency in all 9. So it's really important that, based on how they've had the first 4 conversations, that this last conversation is all about, which technology should we become more conversant in internally over time. And I would say that at least in 5 times out of 10, system integration, both OT and IT, is always one of the top 3. Industrial Internet of Things is also one of the top 3. And then the 6th but last conversation, but by far the least important, probably the most important and the most energy in anybody I work with, is about competencies and people. And what I'd like to do is present them with 9 competencies, bucketed into the 3 categories of people, process, and technology, and ask them to prioritize which of those competencies they have to develop internally to support everything that's been answered so far. So if they're going to become data-driven, understand how to implement these solutions and technologies, what's it going to take? And Lisa, do we have a question? Yeah.
So I figured while we're talking about conversations, I would pop this question up to you.
Yeah.
We are a systems integrator, and a conversation we run into often is about the ROI of investing in these initiatives. How much do we do for free is a challenge. What advice do you have for system integrators who are trying to get clients to move on these initiatives but are running into this headwind?
Yeah, that is a big question. I've seen system integrators that have fairly sophisticated, ROI calculators. A lot of individual vendors for their hardware or software solution will have ROI calculators. But I guess what I've seen the most is, to be honest, is system integrators who would offer some consulting for free, maybe a bit of a discovery process, but to actually do a proof of concept or a proof of value is usually for fee. And so, yeah, I think there's a risk of when you start doing that stuff for free. I'm sorry, it's for a fee. And there's a risk when you start giving that stuff away for free.
I have another question.
Yep.
They're thanking you for the presentation, and then they say, I'm wondering how you are supporting your customers in the leadership and execution of their roadmap. Are you building architectures yourself?
Yeah, I do not. What I do in my role is and what you're seeing here is actually the outputs from a free online tool that I make available to any CSIA member. And I call this a conversation starter instead of an assessment. And so a lot of system integrators I know will have their own discovery process when they meet a client, or their own assessment process to decide where to start. I don't view myself as competing with that. Rather, this is more of a diagnostic picture of how the company thinks of themselves. And this is here to, for a system integrator, there's a 3 or 4 pieces of value that can come from this. If you put this tool out on your website or in an outbound campaign, it can be a lead generator. You can have people clicking on this, and you can see back-end activity building up and know when to contact them. The other thing is, and this gets to your question, is it can inform your existing discovery process. So you're going to have a much better conversation when you have this diagnostic in front of you. It's like having the patient give you an EKG and a blood test before you try to diagnose them. You're also going to get some insights into their culture. So it's by far meant to be more of a front-end process to an existing, client engagement process. It also provides some nice voice of the customer research. So even if you're not going to contact that lead that created this activity, you're getting insights on where manufacturers are struggling. And then the last thing you're going to get with this is you're going to get some really good marketing content. If you're a system integrator and you're trying to move along to become more of a solution architect or a trusted advisor, when you've got a company that's had 6 or 7 people answer these 6 questions, you've got a great story to write about what's happening.
So somebody's clarifying a previous question. They're saying, I think the question about ROI is about proving ROI to the client, not about the SI having an ROI. Many companies don't proceed unless they know it will have a payback.
Yeah. In very true. And I think the way solution providers and system integrators can handle that is usually through a proof of value. I've seen some of the proof of value processes that people have. I've worked with Hitachi Vantari a little bit and then watched theirs in action. But yeah, I just think the question becomes whether to do that for free or for a fee. And I think in most cases, you need to charge for that.
Are there detailed or reference detailed assessments you would recommend?
Oh boy. Yeah. Well, I like mine, but there are, I would say, and I'll have a page about this on a website here soon. I would say there are hundreds of maturity models and readiness assessments around Industry 4.0 or digital transformation. They've been developed over the last 6 to 7 years. Some of them are global in nature. Some have been created by industry, some by governments, some by associations. And almost every big solution provider, like an IT or OT, often like a Rockwell or Siemens will have theirs. But globally, SIRI, the Singapore Industrial Readiness Index, is probably the gold standard, I would say. Architect out of Germany is another one. Warwick out of the UK is a third one. These were all developed by combinations of industrial players and governments and associations, so kind of industry consortia. And then I would say there are, CSIA in the US has one. Almost every state probably has 3 or 4 organizations that have one. The only limit is how creative you are in the dimensions that you're looking at and your scoring index. The reason I created I4Score was, in my experience, the small medium manufacturer found it overwhelming. It's a manual process involving site visits and executive interviews and things like that. And I think for big global companies with multi-facilities, it's a useful tool. I think you have to be cautious about the bandwidth you have as an organization in terms of what tool you choose. But I would literally, the short answer would be, and if everybody wants to follow up with me, I can give them a whole list of them. I'll give you my email at the end.
Perfect. All right, I'm going off camera now. Continue, proceed.
Okay, good. Thank you. I love the question. So, yeah. So back to this last competency question. I would say, in my experience, it is by far the most interesting. The level of engagement you're going to get internally really sometimes depends on whether you conducted this anonymously or on an identified basis. I usually recommend people answer these anonymously. And so the answers to all these questions are attributed by their functional role or level, but not by individual. But you will get some really interesting conversation about what competencies to develop. Engineering will have a different perspective than operations or administrative or functional support. Every company I've worked with assumed that the technology skills, so this is process automation and system integration and things like that, is going to be their biggest weakness, only to find out during conversation that what they really had was issues around standard process and standard work, data governance, program and project management, process oriented. And then once they debated the causes of why they had weaknesses in their process competencies, they realized they had people weaknesses. They had leadership issues, workforce development issues, or change management issues. So I would say in almost every project, the way people first answered this last question was far different than after some alignment and discussions of where they ended up. And this is really important because you should never invest in technology to automate wasteful processes. It's just a poor waste of money. And it's hard to not have wasteful processes if you don't have the right leadership and workforce development and culture, lean culture and data-driven culture. Kind of getting towards the end of my slides here. So if there are any more questions, please pop them in. But this was a slide that I think I actually might have shared with Lisa and Jose Rivera many months ago, but this is why I really like hanging out with control system integrators, because I think they're right at the ground zero for Industry 4.0. And this is what I mean by this is all these bubbles really are business models that have been changing and shifting over time with digital transformation and Industry 4.0. And to me, the control system integrator, the light green there, is really evolving into Industry 4.0 system architect. I had the great opportunity to attend the CSIA executive conference in Denver this summer, and it was really interesting to hear which companies within the membership kind of are starting to extend their capabilities across the automation pyramid, or ISA 95. And like I say, I think what people really are looking for is for a system integrator to become a trusted advisor. And so, if you read the news, and I'm sure many people do, you know that if that's the ISA 95 model in the middle, the information technology system integrators of the world are coming down the pyramid. They're acquiring other system integrators or hiring controls experts or programmable experts, shop floor experts. And along the same way, a lot of OT system integrators are adding, software engineering and all sorts of capability to move beyond process control up through SCADA, and even, creating dashboards with Ignition and MES solutions and Internet of Things solutions. So I think there's a new system integrator right in the middle of this picture, and it's an IoT system integrator. It's somebody that can manage this pyramid and really become the trusted advisor. And I think it's a real opportunity for control system integrators. Just a quick comment on the way I work with system integrators. If they want to, again, feel free to contact me or go to the i4score.com website. But to put this in place, if you do want to use the automated online virtual tool, it's built-in software called Qualtrics, which is survey software. The workflow is all automated. So basically, it's a matter of building a web page, a landing page, and creating some, a story. But at the end of the day, you just want somebody to click on that button and set up a company profile and let the tool kind of distribute the surveys and recruit other people internally. It will provide them some real-time dashboards of how they're answering questions. And once they get enough people answering, I go in on the back end and put some key findings in for them that should drive the conversations that they need to have. So when I work with system integrators, I'm happy to help them build out the website or an outbound newsletter or marketing campaign. And I'm also happy to manage the activity on the back end and only alert them when they've got somebody that's indicating significant interest or filling out quite a few surveys. So here's my contact information. You can reach me at sphillips at i4score.com. You can follow me on LinkedIn if you'd like. The website is i4score.com, and don't hesitate to call me. Whether you'd like more information about other maturity models or anything, happy to help.
Well, we do have some more questions here that I will lob over to you.
Okay.
Back to your progression of different IT, OT architecture designs, can a company that has a siloed IT, OT architectures simply skip over monolithic architecture and go directly to open I4.0 architecture?
Absolutely. That's boy, somebody's really insightful that posted that. So, if you think of developing countries in the world, let's talk about telecom, right? They skipped over the telephone poles and all that and just went right to cell phones, right? And things like that. And that's exactly what a company should think about here. What I hear the most about is a regretful conversation where a manufacturer selected an ERP, and I won't name any names, it really doesn't matter. They kind of have been struggling with it. They might have made the wrong decision, but they're so invested in it that they can't find themselves able to give up. They're using Excel to supplement the deficiencies or other point solutions. But to the degree, at that point in time in 2000, really a better advice to a lot of manufacturers probably would have been an MES system versus an ERP. A lot of them really didn't necessarily have accounting issues per se. They had a lot of shop floor execution issues. So if somebody's only working with an MES system, I think there's a great opportunity to leap over the enterprise software and go right to an IoT platform. And some system integrators either internally have that capability or have partnerships, to be able to develop that IoT platform.
For companies that really don't yet have the ideal leadership, people, or data-driven culture in place yet, how would you recommend they most effectively approach I 4.0 investment opportunities?
Yeah, there's a lot of that. I I would say when I come across that, the only solution I have is education. The only thing I know how to do is to put in front of them information about the topic. What I see a lot is the supervisor level or even shop floor level understanding this more so than leadership, just because leadership is consumed and not in a bad way, but they're just consumed with other issues. I would say peer to peer too. If you can, what I do a lot of is if I find somebody who's a metal fabricator or a machine shop or a kitter or assembler, I almost always have a reference customer in any business model. And I usually have somebody who's open to talking with their peers. And so sometimes that's the best first step, is get them connected with another friendly client you have who's in a similar line of business or a similar industry.
How do you train others for how to implement and use the survey tool?
For the most part, the tool is self-explanatory. So when I created this tool, after having tried some of those other models, what I realized is no one in most manufacturing organizations has an hour or two to sit down at a table and go through some questions, especially not a large sample of people. So I broke this into 6 surveys that are 5 to 10 minutes. Each survey has all the education and definitions in the header in the very beginning of the survey. And probably the question I get the most often is from a leadership team is, I don't think our frontline workers understand this topic well enough to answer it. And that's the worst answer I can get. Because it's back to those perspectives, right? Nothing in any of the surveys gets too technical. And so anybody can take them. I used to have a separate learning management system, an LMS module, where people went to a WordPress site first. But the feedback I got is, we're not going to take a frontline worker off their job for more than 5 to 10 minutes to both go to some training and then take a survey. So if I've embedded the education right in the survey, it's all online. It can be taken by phone or any other tool.
When we speak about the small and medium companies, there are a lot of purpose-built infrastructures that exist. How do you cut through these organizations from the mindset perspective, as most of the time they are more apprehensive for the change, even though there's a need and willingness for change?
Yeah, that's a great question. Manufacturing is a risk-averse business by nature, right? Especially if you're in a regulatory business with first-part approvals or regulatory requirements. Your process may not be as profitable and efficient you want, but if it's working, why change it? And especially with the complexity of manufacturing. So I understand it and I get that. But I think it kind of comes back to the conversation we were having around proof of concepts and proof of value. I think you've almost got to crack the door open a little bit by finding a pain point in there and focusing specifically on that to kind of change the mindset. Because again, back to my question 4, I would say, when we say under 500 employees, realize that in Michigan alone, where I am, we have 13,000 manufacturers. 85% of them are 30 people and less. And that's pretty true around most, especially discrete manufacturing states. So you really got to get in there and understand what the pain point is. And like I said, I guess, crack the door a little bit.
So I want to remind folks that if you do have a question, help me out here and put it in the Q&A versus the chat. It's just easier for me to monitor one window versus two windows. Thank you. My next question is, do you have preferred IIoT platforms?
Oh, you know, I try to stay pretty tool agnostic. The system integrators that I like to partner with, to be honest, are the ones that go up and down at ISA 95 in terms of capabilities. I also tend to like the ones who are using a lot of tool sets, especially open architecture tools. It doesn't mean that it's always the right fit, but if I'm going to recommend somebody to an integrator, you know, it doesn't always make sense if they're heavy on Siemens or Rockwell or so forth. The markers I tend to look for on the website. So I have a website screening tool. And what I do is I go to a system integrator and I look at their capabilities, their partnerships. So are they partnering with cloud partners? Are they partnering with Ignition? Are they partnering with Cirrus Link, with Opto or somebody like Opto? So I have about 5 or 6 markers where if I look at a system integrator and say, you know what, they look like they're very ambidextrous, very versatile in terms of their capability and a wide tool set. And, you know, when it comes to IoT platform, you know, you've got Litmus, you've got just, you know, PTC and hundreds and hundreds. When I talk to system integrators, they tend to have their favorite depending on who they are for good reason. But yeah, you know, like I say, 50% of the time I look at the results of a roadmap and I'm recommending the system integrator. I'm going to let them make that recommendation, that next level.
What was the book you mentioned earlier about the intelligence of all? This
Yeah.
is yeah.
It's called The Wisdom of Crowds. And the author is James Surowiecki, Sureiewiki, I believe. But it's called The Wisdom of Crowds. And it's a real fun read. Yeah.
Who within the organization do you find really need to be brought in upfront to get started with your survey tool?
Oh. Well, often you do need somebody in leadership to authorize it to be used, you know, to be willing to provide the time. I would say you want a cross section, but the one person you probably want to get to bite on it is a process engineer. I feel like manufacturing engineers and process engineers usually have the biggest axe to grind. And they if they can get some data to prove their points, yeah, that's probably where I would start, process engineer.
Is it necessary to go through the system integrators always? Is that the best strategy from the SME market's perspective?
So the way I look at it is that the way I categorize the ecosystem is manufacturers need one of 6 things. They need an educator if they need education. They need a consultant if they don't have a strategy or a plan. If they have a strategy or plan, they often need an integrator. Or maybe they can integrate, but they need point solutions. So they need specific solutions to go into the system. Or they may need a service provider. They don't need any of that. They need somebody to come in and provide a service. So I have a CRM database of about 500 solution providers. I probably have 80 system integrators in there. But of those 5 types of solution providers, system integrators, and I do tend to divide it between IT and OT. But the answer to your question is, yeah, sometimes if they've got integration capability internally, they're ready to jump to some specific solution providers.
Follow-up question to that is, doesn't it make it more chaotic?
Chaotic to not use a system integrator?
I'm not really sure. For the person who asked this question, you find all the 6 elements.
Oh, the 6 conversations?
Tell you what, why don't, Sarang, will you do me a favor and put your contact information in the chat?
Yeah.
And then I can have Scott follow up with you after our discussion.
Yeah. Thank you.
Scott, let's do one more question and then we'll wrap it up. How do you feel about that?
Sure.
Which of the 4 common mistakes do you see the most?
Complacency, the frog boiling in the water. I would say especially US versus Europe or Asia. And it's for a number of reasons, but it's almost in order of the 4. So probably I would say 40 to 50% of the people I've worked with are it's a complacency issue. The next one by far is decisions overlooked. The next one is poorly made. It's only the bigger companies really making the last 2 mistakes because they've been able to get beyond the first 2. But by far, it's complacency.
All right, I lied. I'm going to ask one more,
Okay.
so that Jennifer has time to get my last slides put together for me. Which of 6 conversations drive the most discussion and debate?
The competencies by far. Yep. Especially, like I say, if you've got a broad, diverse set of input, and you should have an N of 10. So if you had at least 10 people and they came from diverse backgrounds, because what the system is going to point out is the patterns in their responses. And that's usually what drives the conversation. But by far, it's the last one, the competency discussion.
Thank you. Jennifer, we put up my last slides and we'll wrap this up. On behalf of CSIA, I would like to thank Scott, our speaker, for this informative discussion. I would also like to thank I4Score for presenting this event. And of course, thank you for attending. I'd also like to remind you that a recording will be available for viewing within the next couple of days. Be sure to bookmark the CSIA events calendar so you don't miss any upcoming events. If anybody's going to be at the Rockwell Automation Fair, CSIA is going to have a booth there, and we're also having a little happy hour after the show floor closes on Wednesday. We'd love to see you, and you don't have to be a member to attend. We're just hoping to get a few folks together, and maybe we just wait out the line of the taxi line or whatever, but it'll be nice to see everybody. And one last thing, be sure to check your spam folder for any CSIA emails you might have missed. Even better, whitelist CSA so you can stay up to date. This concludes our program for today. Once again, thank you for joining us and have a great day.